Our next speaker is an incredibly dynamic woman. She's incredibly smart, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from her. Dr. Carrie Moorfield is someone that I met here just recently, and she does a lot of stuff with reproductive health with animals. I have not had the opportunity to work with her on it yet, but my understanding is that she's able to verify pregnancy on certain species utilizing feces, which would be incredibly useful. You know, if you've got an animal that you're wanting to sell and someone wants to know if it's bred, if you can do some testing simply with picking up a few pieces of the poo, that's a huge benefit. So I'm going to go ahead and have Dr. Moorfield come up and share our presentation with us.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction and having me. Clearly, I'm going to be talking about poop. How lovely. Spent 20 years studying this, and I talk about shit, but that's okay. So today, I'm going to talk about 10 ways that you can improve your breeding success for your individual animal or animals. When Brian asked me to talk, he said, you know, you have about 20, 30 minutes to cover wildlife breeding. I'm like, what the heck? How am I going to do that? So instead, I'm going to take lessons I've learned from my 25 years in this industry to really break down some key lessons that you can take home and do starting today. So we move from like the most basic to some more complicated things that I'm really excited to talk about, and I'm really inviting you into what I'm presenting for our community. And so this is lessons from animals, obviously. So yes, I guess, show of hands, who has an elephant here? Probably not many. I'm showing you this because I specialize in elephant reproduction, and I've spent the last 25 years doing my PhD and all of that on elephant reproduction. Being naive, you know, they said, hey, can you solve the problem of poor reproduction in elephants in zoos? And I like big problems, and I like coming up with innovative solutions. So I took on this path. And so a lot of what I've learned are lessons from elephants and working mostly with people. That's the thing, like I'm a wildlife biologist, but I really, really love working with people and individual peoples. So anyway, that's the elephant. So when I talk about doing reproductive things with animals and wildlife, everybody gets kind of freaked out that it has to look like this. So on that screen is actually an elephant cervix. So that's elephant semen in that tube. I'm a huge supporter of education, so that's a bunch of my team and students. Elephants over off the screen. So I'm AIing an elephant using a 6-foot endoscope, super crazy complicated. But I always think if you can do complicated things, I like to put them down into small bite-sized pieces to make it more practical and applied. So everything I'm gonna talk about is like, this isn't always practical, and I get that. But how can I help you without even touching the animal necessarily, and some things that do touch the animal? So we do things like this. And we think of this. So here I help run a vasectomy project for elephants in Africa. So I run a whole program in Africa, have a home in Africa. I've been going there for 20 plus years. And I'm really big on crossing the ocean with ideas, right? What we learn in Africa, we apply to wildlife in the US and vice versa. So here we're doing a vasectomy on an elephant. Crazy complicated. So people think, so please don't stop listening. We're not gonna do this, or we could do this, but it doesn't have to look like that. So this is the feedback I get. It's complicated, it's too sciencey, it's too fancy, my animals will never do that. But I'll tell you right now, that's me palpating an elephant for a semen collection, is not fancy. It doesn't have to be fancy. And I'm gonna tell you, we can do some very simple things, and we can do some fancy things. But the point is, fancy science doesn't work unless you can apply it on a regular basis. So that's what I do. A little bit about my background, so you know who I am and how I might help you. So I've worked with a variety of institutions. I'm actually from Nebraska, raised on a small farming community of 200 people. But from a young child, like I just really wanted to work with African wildlife. Like what kid in Nebraska has that dream? And you know, sometimes my parents were teachers and they just knew I was gonna do something like this. And I just had that from a child, and that's what I've done. So of course in Nebraska, we didn't have a lot of African wildlife, so I did my studies on pigs, cattle, horses, Nebraska things. But I really learned a lot about just basic techniques and technologies on what to do and how we can apply that to wildlife. Because it really wasn't done that often in wildlife. But to me, I'm like, this is just a normal industry. Why aren't we propagating species doing these kind of things for wildlife? I did my PhD with the Smithsonian So after being in Nebraska, raised in Nebraska, they said, well, if you want to get your PhD, or if you want to really make decisions for wildlife reproduction, go out to the Smithsonian. I'm like, no, I'm comfortable. That fire in your belly just doesn't go away. And so I sold everything, packed my cats, drove away in my truck. My parents were like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And then there was just no turning back. So sometimes you have to take leaps, right? And I'm gonna hopefully encourage you to take some leaps along the way. So I've started nonprofits and charities working with elephants. Basically, those nonprofits are all academic-based, a big support of education. So I have graduate students. So that nonprofit all supports the education component. But it's not just elephants, right? I work with a ton of different species, a lot of work in Africa as well. I also work with a lot of zoos. So what I do now for my job is I work with people and places around the world, both internationally, and I work with zoos. So I'm a chair for the AZA's Reproduction Scientific Group for all zoos. So it's really important to me. They're like, pick zoos or pick private. I don't want to pick, so I started my own business because I just like to work with animals and people doing good things for animals. A little bit of my background. So that gave me like the formal training. This gave me the real training. These are my daughters, Gianna and Scarlett. They've been going to Africa with me since they've been 6 months of age. It's really important for me to teach kids about wildlife and nature, and that's them in an elephant barn. And you know, it really hit me when I was really working at a zoo, I had like what I thought was my dream job, but I just saw like application that zoos weren't really ready to support. And I was talking to my daughter and she's like, Mom, if you have all these ideas, you should probably just go do it because who else will? And you know, when your 8-year-old puts you on the spot, you do it. Because at the end of the day, you know, I'm gonna tell her, well, at least I tried, right? I took that leap. So this is my motivation for doing a lot of what I do. Okay, so now let's get down to the real parts of what the 10 tips. So now the real title is Lessons I've Learned from Making a Lot of Mistakes and taking some leaps as well. So again, we're gonna go from some basic stuff to some more complicated. So a lot of times it's just in this room, as you're looking through these, see how this could apply to your animals. Sometimes it's just basic of knowing what's normal for your species, right? At what age do they mature? What's their gestation? Are they seasonal, right? When you can expect them to go into estrus. So a lot of the species you just think they must be like cattle, they must be like horses, but every species is so unique. And if you don't know your species, send me and I'll tell you some basic parameters about their reproduction. Because if you don't know what's normal, you don't know what's abnormal, right? So just knowing the basic biology of your species, super important. Even for your males, right? Do they go through a seasonal pattern of testosterone? This is an elephant, they go through must. So know what's expected. That helps you at a management perspective and a breeding perspective. Because if you don't know the normal, you don't know what's off. We don't know what to fix. So that's number one. And that's a simple phone call to me, tell me your species, and I'll give you the rundown of what you should expect. Second thing is know the reproductive history of your animal. When you're moving and purchasing animals, it's surprising to me how sometimes there's just not information about the background. Now don't freak out and say, how the heck am I gonna find this? What I'd rather promote is start where we are and move forward. So from this day forward, start your database. If you don't wanna do that, I'll do that for you. But you know, basic things, how many offspring, age at first breeding if you know age. So that in itself builds, and then you can make informed decisions, right? But a lot of times we don't know. If you're purchasing an animal and know nothing about the reproductive history, that could be an issue. But start today. Okay, confirming the reproductive status. This is really cool and just very sciencey and easy. The cool part about this, I've spent many, many years optimizing different lab things to do this non-invasively. You send me a couple of fecal samples, I can tell if your animal's pregnant. That's crazy. No blood, send me the fecals. So the other part of reproductive status is basic things of, do you have an active female that's cycling, right? If they don't cycle, they can't breed. So this female, well, for example, a giraffe has a 15-day cycle. So you send me some fecals, and I can just tell you, yeah, she's cycling normal. She is capable of pregnancy. A lot of times, we have a situation where it looks like that. So if you look like that, they're not ovulating, and then they can't get pregnant, right? So there's not a lot of reason to put a lot of effort. We'll work on fixing that. But if you're wondering why she's not getting pregnant, sometimes it's because she's not even having a reproductive cycle, right? So we can do this all by poop samples. And on the male side of things, also equally important. You want to see a normal, healthy response of testosterone in relationship to the female. Now you're thinking, how the heck I'm going to collect all these samples? And we can talk about ways to do that, but you don't need to do that. You can just opportunistically take a couple of samples, and I can look for high and low patterns and tell you some basic information. But sometimes we take for granted, like just thinking every animal is going to be a perfect breeder. That's not the case. So just knowing like some basic information, and it seems like a lot of work up front, but then the value of that information going forward is just, it's immeasurable. Okay, some things on how we test hormones. Fecal samples, saliva samples, urine samples, and over on the right is giraffe fecal samples. So super easy, collect some fecals, put it in a bag, send it to me, and then I can tell you a lot about your animal. Not difficult to do. And some of the things like we can learn from hormones and from a fecal sample is, of course, the seasonality of an animal, pregnancy, but one of the biggest things that's overlooked is the stress level of an animal. Stress is highly related to reproductive outcome, and we can look at a stress level in an animal's fecal sample. That's hugely important, especially as you're moving animals, of how they're acclimating to their new environment, because that can mess up their breeding. For example, this is a case study we did with an elephant. So the first part is the elephant before construction was being done. Okay, so just cortisol is pretty low, about that 20. And then the second part, where the red is higher, the elephants were locked inside for a significant amount of time that they weren't used to, and their cortisol went up to 25. And you think, well, that's not a huge increase. But actually for their physiology, that's really high, and what happened right in the middle of that is she miscarried. She was pregnant. So having this information is really important to how you manage pregnant animals, because stress can be an effector for pregnancy outcome. So just knowing there's actually some science behind this, right? So being aware of pregnant animals and changing housing could be really important to their outcome. And then at the end, the cortisol went back down. But the unfortunate thing was the miscarriage. So this is another thing we can do if I can get my hands on your animals is an ultrasound. So on the bottom, like that circle here, that's actually a heart of a giraffe fetus at 12 months gestation. So it's very cool. So we can see the heart, that's the ventricles, we can see the pumping of it. So just some confirmation of viable calf or offspring. And that happened to be from just through the fence. So depending on your animals, I know a lot we can't touch. So if they're sedated, awesome. But also, if your animals will let me, I can just do that through a fence in about 3 seconds. So, and I'm willing to try. This is also a reproductive ultrasound for males. So we do semen collections. So this can be sedated or non-sedated animals. So since this is educational, I'm just going to show you a couple things. This is the bladder. These are called the ampulla, and that's where the semen actually aggregates. So we're looking for this, they say it looks like an alien, like a face, there's eyes in the mouth. So we're looking at the ampulla, and we want those full like that, that's full of semen. So we do that before the semen collection, so we know what to expect. If those are empty, there's no sense doing a semen collection because you're not gonna get the sperm cells. So here they are again, right, really full. And what happens after the collection? They collapse like that, right? So then we know that we got all the semen. So just knowing there's things, and even just doing a quick look, like if you're knocking down an animal, I can just do a quick look to make sure the ampulla are there. Everything is normal reproductively when you're looking at soundness of your males. Again, pretty basic, and we're moving on. Assessing and optimizing body condition. Body condition and fat reserves are so crucial for healthy reproduction from the day they're born throughout their lifetime. So body condition, the amount of fat, is directly related to when a female will start to cycle because she has enough fat to maintain pregnancy. Body condition is super important also for not getting too high for a successful pregnancy to reduce miscarriage. So the thing though, in a lot of wildlife species, we don't have metrics to do that quickly that are validated, right? So in cattle, most other species, domestic species, there's a simple visual system, usually a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 9 scale. 1's usually the thinnest, 9's the fattest, and you can visually look at body condition. Super simple, but super valuable for your animals. So typically the middle score is your ideal body condition. When I was starting looking at fertility problems in elephants, this is the first thing I looked at, was body condition. Because I knew from my work in Africa, zoo elephants were fat. Nobody wanted to hear that, right? But I wanted to have the science to back that up. And so sure enough, what did I do? I developed a validated, scientifically meaningful way to assess obesity in elephants. So here's the final thing. Too much work for one graphic. But of course, I validated it. So each score definitely has a different level of body fat based on hormones and ultrasound. But what that did, again, I'm like very much do all the science and then break it down. So I worked with 68 different zoos, and I said, go score your animal. And they're like, well, we don't know how. So then I built a flow chart, right? Start here. These are always very fun. Start here. Find ribs. Yes, no. So my goal for the wildlife is to develop as many of these as possible that are necessary to give you tools that are useful. And some of the take home from this is we found 75% of zoo elephants are overweight or obese, but the bigger thing in reproductive issues, which would be relative to what you guys are thinking about, is elephants that were that category 5, so obese, they were 3 times more likely not to have a reproductive cycle. If they don't cycle, they can't get pregnant. So many of our issues for zoo elephants was because they were too fat, right? So what do? Come up with practical ways to improve body condition, get them down to a 3. That increases your likelihood of pregnancy. So again, these aren't out of the world concepts. It's very basic biology, but it's having some sound tools that are easy that you can apply on a day-to-day basis. But that alone, controlling for too much body fat can increase your reproductive success. So the goal of that too was just knowing that when you go then say, hi, I'm gonna do this for sable or kudu or bongo, those validated indexes don't typically exist for wildlife, but now I'm on a path to make those validated. I'm almost finished with a giraffe one, but wherever there's a need, right? So again, it's not just Carrie thinks your animal's a 2, or Brian thinks your animal's a 7. There's actual scientific data behind it. And it just helps communication too. And you know what you're looking for when you're purchasing and moving animals. Number 5, start semen collection. And this is because you can assess, do a soundness, a breeding exam for your males by doing a quick semen collection. When I say that, this of course can just be opportunistically. So if you're darting your animals for any reason, you can give me a call and I can do a quick semen collection on them. And then I'll tell you concentration, motility, just some basic characteristics of semen quality. Huge factor in breeding, but so many times we don't even know that. We can also train animals. Here I am for a giraffe. We can also train animals, depending on your facility, to do semen collections just by training. Behavior training, they're in a chute. Yesterday, I just did this at a facility. They said, well, he hasn't been touched in the rear, but you can give it a try. So we put him in a chute, and he just let me palpate him, massage him, and we got a little bit of semen. So it's just amazing. So there's opportunities for different things. But doing a semen collection is so important. So if you're familiar with horses, pigs, cattle, that semen industry is huge, right? For moving, getting genetics, we're gonna talk a little bit about genetics, without having to move animals. But this just is not a common practice in wildlife. And so I was so excited, meeting Brian and Wildlife Partners. They're innovative, they're change makers, and everybody in this room has that, which is why you're here. I wanna start making this part of our normal industry, doing semen collections, moving semen for AI, and I'll get a little bit more into the economics part of that, but it's such a huge tool that we can use. I never say substitute for natural breeding, but it is a tool that we should be using for wildlife. Again, I break it down. So if you say, I have no idea what this looks like, I'm a huge fan of flowcharts, check sheets. I say, like for example, this is one we use to train your animals if you want to do non-sedated semen collection. I tell you everything that you need to do, right? They have to be restrained, and then you come up with a timeline. So just as an example of, I like to break things down in small chunks, and then we work through them. Again, to the non-fancy, this is some of our equipment for semen collections for giraffe and elephant. Not fancy, right? But it does the job. Over there, this unit, that's where we, how we transport semen, frozen semen. And so actually that container right now is over in the Marriott in my room because I'm transporting elephant semen to do an AI tomorrow. Just telling you, like, these things are practical, right? That's the whole idea. I'm not telling you my room number, yeah. And this is liquid gold. This is an elephant semen collection, about 500 mils. And I'm showing you this because in the cattle horse industry, a straw of semen, which is like half a mil, will go for hundreds to thousands of dollars. So here's your $100,000 semen collection. Just showing you there is an industry in this, not just for economics, but the conservation way. We've been trying to do this in zoos and wildlife so much for conservation reasons, but there we go, liquid gold. Send me testes when your male dies. So besides just extracting semen and collecting it when a male is living, if your male dies within 24 hours, if you can send me the testes, I can extract the sperm cells from that. So this is a giraffe that just recently died. They gave me a call. I said, wrap it in tissues, ice, send it to me, got the testes, extracted the sperm cells. There you go, 20 mils of semen, resulting are straws. That's enough. We do about 4 to 5 straws per AI. That's a lot of artificial inseminations, right? I mean, and this is so valuable because this male has no living offspring. All of his offspring had passed away. So genetically valuable. Without this, his genetics don't go on, right? So even if you think that, well, we don't need to do this, our breeding is fine, I would challenge you to say opportunistically get your males banked because you never know, right? And in time, you just don't know what we can do. So when I say bank it, I store it in liquid nitrogen. It lasts for hundreds of years, right? So it stops all metabolisms of the sperm cells. So I'm just encouraging you to join me in doing some of this for whatever species. There's the tanks. So this is the liquid nitrogen. So to tell you kind of how passionate I am about this, when the pandemic hit and the lab I was working at shut down, I was like, conservation and this work doesn't shut down. So you know how most people have like a entertainment center or a gym in their basement? I renovated my whole basement to be a full reproductive endocrinology lab. Yeah, I'm that much of a dork. But it didn't stop. So then all the zoos that shut down, I would just receive all the samples and everything at my doorstep. So the science goes on, right? So I'm just saying there's always a way. And so now I have a really strange house, but it's awesome, yeah. And this is showing you, so this is Jimmy, the male that had passed. There was only 2 giraffes at that facility. This is Annabelle. And now the cool part, that sperm, that semen that was frozen, I'm going there in the spring to AI her, right? With his semen, which is very cool. So we're hopeful that his genetics will continue. So there is practical ways for this. I don't want it to feel like I get a lot, like how are you messing with this? It's an all or none. I think this is another tool for you to consider. Number 7, plan for artificial insemination. Now, why the heck is there a dog on this? I'm telling you that because I did my first artificial insemination while I was at a zoo, but the first one that really took was for dogs for the zoo director. Now this is crazy, right? So I was working at the zoo for a couple years and we're doing all of this in gorillas and tigers and whatnot, and then he was seeing success and he just said, hey, I've been having this beagle that we can't get bred. And so I'm like, sure, I'll give it a try, right? That's what you do when you're 20. And so I have come up with this recipe that I've used now for the 20 years that I said, well, tell me when she's in estrus, right? I can do the placement. I need good semen. And the environment has to be good, meaning the environment of her physical shape, right? The physiology. and also her outside environment. Is that housing appropriate for this? Is her stress levels low? All of these things. So this is my recipe for AI success that I developed then. I asked those questions. He told me when she was in estrus, just based on behavior. So there's two ways. You can look at behavior in an animal, if you know that. Or you send me the samples and I can tell you when they're gonna ovulate and I time it that way, right? I ensured I had a good semen sample from another beagle. And then I really did the like old school turkey baster method because, you know, I didn't have equipment and it worked, right? So I'm just saying, like, if you have these 4 things in place, your success rate goes really high. And you think I'm joking about the turkey baster thing, I'm not. So it works though, it doesn't have to be complicated. Backing up to the elephant stuff I showed you, all that equipment, endoscopes, crazy. Guess what I'm working with a company now is if you can kind of visualize a super soaker for an elephant, right? We're going to very basic. Instead of doing all that, I actually don't have to see that the semen's going to the cervix. I just have to know the technology is enabling it to get there. And I'm doing that because I don't want to be the only one able to do this one day. Like, this can't die with me. So for me to build the tools that other people can do this in-house, that's my goal. All right, number 8, participate in sperm sex sorting research. This has huge utility in wildlife, any species. So many zoos I work with, you know, want specific female offspring because they're easier to manage, house, social dynamics, etc. So I first did this with gorillas years ago. So this entailed, though, writing a 2-year grant, getting all the funding, teaching a gorilla for semen collection, figuring out the freezing method for gorillas. And then it works, right? So what we can do, it's so cool. Sorry, getting a little bit more science here. So how we sex sort semen, and what I mean by that is you can basically sort sperm that you can designate the offspring will be female or male. It's so cool. So how this works, so right, XX means female. So the egg's always X, right? And the sperm determines sex. So there's X-bearing sperm and Y. If it's Y, it's gonna be male. If it's X, it's gonna be female. So you can see the X chromosome is a lot bigger and heavier than the Y, right? So based on weight, just from the size of the chromosome, we can put the sperm, so we collect the sperm, put it, it's called through a flow cytometer that separates it based on weight, right? So the sperm go through this thing, all X-bearing go one way, all Y-bearing go the other way. And it's 90% effective. That's pretty dang good. But why isn't this being done in wildlife? Would there be some preference for male or female in some species? Yeah, this could be really useful. Or some ranches I've worked with say, some reason, like, we're only getting males 10 times. And you think, well, nature works it out, it'll 50-50 eventually. Well, if you don't want to wait 200 years for that to normalize, this is the good option. So the other species that we're doing this with right now is dolphins, right? And the reason these are the species is because we got grants for these things. But I'm saying let's make this into normal everyday use, right, to propagate our species. Okay, number 9 is collect samples for genetic testing. And Dr. Durr did an amazing job. He's a geneticist, I am not a geneticist, but everything I'm talking about today should be mindful of genetics, right? And I'm not going to talk all about the instances of inbreeding and plus and minuses, but being mindful of the genetics that you're breeding, right? So just because I have a bank of bongo semen doesn't mean I just pick one. I want to make responsible decisions for you to ensure the most genetically appropriate fit, right? We are also in this for conservation, so there's a sustainability way of this too. And as was clearly explained, we don't know all of the genetics, right? But you can start somewhere by first making your own database, who's breeding with who, what do you know pedigree-wise, and start collecting samples. And let's start doing this wisely. Like, I work with zoos, I'm part of the AZA. We still don't do this great. I would love for a group like this to bring something amazing like this to the zoo community, right? Like, let's be forward-thinking, let's design these things, and that's so possible. So collect samples. All the breeding stuff has to be responsible. I'm just gonna give one example of what we're doing for giraffe. So actually we have figured out the genome for giraffe with my Smithsonian colleagues, And right now we're working with any institution that has giraffe, zoo, private, shopping mall, whatever it might be. If you have a giraffe, we want the hair samples because we want to start really understanding who's related to who. And especially as I'm promoting more AI and semen collection in giraffes, we want to make good decisions. Like, which species of giraffe do you have, right? So now we've launched on this big project for this reason, because we want to make sound decisions. So this project is going on. So we have 67 samples. When we get to 100, we get to test the first 100. So if anybody has a giraffe in here, collect some hairs, send them to me. But this is just one example of where this could go. And what you could easily do is collect samples. And I'm just going to spend a little time on this big one that has me really fired up, that I'm really excited to share, is importing semen from Africa. And there's a buffalo on there. That's after a dog. That was the species I spent a lot of time working on in Africa, Cape buffalo. And I'll talk about that and why I was doing that. This is a lot of words, but I'm going to just show you what this means. So when I was in Africa working with buffalo, so we would go and dart an entire herd, and then I would go out and just collect semen from all of them, right? So there'd be like 20 buffalo down, so I go from one buffalo, collect semen, collect semen, collect semen. But of course, a lot of those buffalo had brucellosis, Brucella abortus, different pathogens, right? And so you can't use that semen for AI because you have the potential of infecting the female and then the offspring, right? So diseased semen isn't useful. You can't use it. And there's a lot of diseased animals. And then I was thinking, because I was working with the zoos, and I'm like, well, there has to be a way to rid the semen of these pathogens. And I knew that because I had done a lot of work with IVF and embryos and stuff. This group, International Embryo Transfer Society, set the guideline. These are embryos. You can actually ship embryos across the ocean. You just can't ship semen. And the reason you can ship embryos, so that's after sperm, egg already, right, is because they've come up with a method to render them pathogen-free. So you wash them through this trypsin. Basically, it's an enzyme, and it releases the pathogens from adhering to the embryo. So basically, there's a way, right? You prove you wash them, and then you can ship them. And me always thinking, I'm like, why the heck aren't we doing this for semen? Because there's a lot of utility of importing semen for a lot of different reasons into the US. And so this is what I do in my spare time. This is in my heart a lot, right? You don't always have to wait for things to be done. I think we take for granted how much this power is within people if you just do things. And so I decided I was going to get rid of pathogens from semen. And so I spent a lot of years of doing that. And what happened is I figured out a way. Without going into all the details, this is a centrifuge tube. And how this works is, so that enzyme that works for embryos, I thought, I have to use that same thing, regulations and blah, blah, blah. If I did the same thing on semen, and so I tried that. Turns out trypsin, like the normal concentration for embryos for sperm, just killed it. And I was like, dang, that's too bad. And then I thought, well, it's because it has to just be like subject to the trypsin for a short amount of time and then washed of it, right? Like exposure, reduce pathogens, and then wash. And so I came up with this method where these are different densities, right? So you put the trypsins in here, that wash. These are different layers. So basically, it's like oil and water, right? Different densities, so they stay separate. I put the sperm on here, and by a centrifuge, which goes around really fast by that process, the sperm cells move down to the bottom of the tube, right? So it's happening, it's moving, it's like preparing, so it's going through the treatment and then washing after, right? So it's like a short exposure. So I did that, and then I decided, like, I didn't want to go through to get the sperm pellet out. Like, if there's pathogens in here, I was just going to recontaminate it. So I made this device that goes through the tube. So when I got the sperm cells out, like, you wouldn't recontaminate by going through this zone that has the pathogens, right? So I developed this tube insert, right? That helps this process, because this is what you do when you're 21. But it was just so important. I'm like, this has to be done. And so sure enough, so it worked on removing Brucella abortus from buffalo and Gower in cattle. The same process worked for This is what I did my master's on. This worked for PRRS. It's a virus in pig semen that's a billion-dollar industry that wipes out pigs and of course is transmitted in semen. So I worked with a pig company and it removes this virus, right? So then you can have infected, valuable males, collect the semen, wash it, and then you don't transmit the disease to offspring or mother. And the biggest thing, I spent a lot of time in Africa. We try to do this in the US, but to get permits for HIV-infected semen is really hard. But in Africa, we really went to the township, to the local HIV clinic, and just said, hey, do you want to participate in this? So we could get HIV-infected semen that way. But it removes HIV. And that was a big deal, right? So we're just finding it doesn't work just on bacteria, but on viruses as well. And my mind is always like, okay, cool, now we can import semen, right? Like now we've proved that it can get rid of pathogens. But the other part then, it's just because it gets rid of pathogens, it also still has to be able to fertilize, right? Clean, dead sperm are no good. So then we did all the trials with sows first, right? So we did the sows. But the cool part is, the semen that was treated actually turned out better than non-treated semen. So it does something with activation of the acrosome, which is on the sperm, that actually promotes that adhering with the egg. So our rates were better. So we were at 85% for our trypsin versus 50% for just regular sperm. So it was like, dang, even if you don't have a disease issue, just processing semen this way will increase your rates. Another thing then in cows, same thing, so increased our fertilization rates, so 88% compared to 63%. And then we also want to look at the number of embryos that recovered after AI and more embryos. So it was just like, dang, now we proved that it removes pathogens and it also improves fertility rates. And so we were on our way. And then at that time, so we have a patent on this and all of that, and I thought, cool, this is before my PhD, so cool, this is on the way, we're moving, I'm gonna go do my PhD, this will keep moving. Well, what happened, because I wasn't there physically working on this, moving it forward, it hasn't moved forward, right? So you just need a group of small, dedicated people moving big ideas forward. So now I jumped back on this 2 years ago, and now my goal in 2 years is to import semen for the first time from Cape Buffalo to the US and hopefully to Wildlife Partners. So my question for you, out of those 10 things, what can you do today, right, short term? What can you do in 90 days? What can you do in a year? So just think about, like, what is your next step? And maybe it's just calling me for a consult, like thinking that, like, I'm great at brainstorming. What do you want to do? But what's your next step? And then hopefully maybe next year you're up here talking about some of these cool things that you're doing. Anyway, thank you, and thank you, Brian, for having me.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Anybody want coffee with Carrie and Elon Musk anytime soon? She's, her brain is moving all the time, and the experience that she has is it's pretty incredible to hear her tell stories about the things that she's been doing. And one of the things that we found is that she does offer consulting for ranches. So if you have an interest in working with her, whether it's strategic planning for your ranch and your breeding operation, or whether it's just related to fertilization and breeding and things like that, please make the effort to reach out to her, and I know she'll be more than happy to help.